One football player to keep your eye on this evening in Super Bowl 50 this year is Michael Oher, number 73, offensive tackle for the Carolina Panthers. In his youth, he had no parents to raise him, but eventually a kind family raised him and gave him an education. Later, as an adult, he was drafted and recruited for the NFL. His adopted mom called it an amazing journey to the Super Bowl. But whether in athletics or in business or getting a job or in the military or in education, the recruitment phase is an important part of one's life. And that's the first main point. You want the right people on your team. But whether it's the beginnings of a Super Bowl athlete or the beginnings of a new job that you might have, some questions that pop up are, what's your story? How did you get involved with this? How did you start off? We see the importance of a recruitment story in today's gospel. Here we see the humble beginnings of the great Simon the fisherman first following Jesus. Jesus called Simon Peter and the other disciples to follow him and said that they will catch souls for the kingdom through fishing. Simon eventually became Peter, the first pope. Jesus called Peter Simon and made him fish for the kingdom through a vocation. And that vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, which means to call. The second main point is this. Just as Jesus recruited Simon Peter, he also recruits you and me. Now, this homily is where I get a little bit more personal. And I have preached over 50 homilies since ordination as a married permanent deacon. And my hope is to increase awareness of what a permanent deacon is at St. Joseph's. Perhaps Jesus is calling you, now or later. Or you might know somebody. Or if somebody expresses interest, perhaps we as a parish community might be able to support that person. And my story is this. I was in high school when I met my first permanent deacon at St. John's in Milpitas near San Jose. I had just started practicing my Catholic faith after my grandfather died. I was an altar server. I was even in the choir. I had just received the sacrament of confirmation and eventually became a catechist. The new parish deacon's name was Eugene O'Sullivan, a nuclear engineer, an Irishman in his 60s from Kansas. And his wife's name was Lois. When they first came to my boyhood parish, I remember clearly like it was yesterday, maybe about 30 seconds of what he said. And I'm going to do exactly what he did. I'll take about a minute or so to do what he did 25 years ago right now when he introduced himself. It's like what St. Paul said in the second reading to the first letter to the Corinthians when he said, "For I handed on to you what I also received." So I'm handing this on to you. Perhaps Deacon O'Sullivan did not know that he was fishing that day when he preached. Now he said, a deacon is a member of the clergy. He is a servant of the people. He assists the priests at Mass and outside of Mass. Deacons for many centuries was only a stepping stone to become a priest. But after the Second Vatican Council, Vatican II allowed married men to serve as permanent deacons who do not intend to become priests. And that's why they're called permanent. He said that deacons can baptize, preach homilies, officiate weddings and funerals, do blessings and benedictions, and can have a wife with a family. He speaks for the voiceless and the poor through acts of charity and love. And deacons typically are not called father, but rather we're simply called deacon, like Deacon Dennis. His wife Lois would sit in front of the pews, and every time the word of God was being proclaimed, she would close her eyes. And don't worry, she wasn't asleep because she woke her eyes up. She opened her eyes when the lector said the word of the Lord. Now later, a few months down the road, I was at a celebration for a priest celebrating his anniversary. It was December 23, 1990. And somebody from the parish, it was actually somebody from the Legion of Mary, approached me and said, "Hey, have you thought about the priesthood?" I said, "Well, I think I can serve God as a married man. I can give my life to God totally as a married man." And that parishioner was fishing too. And I also said, "Yeah, the Deacon Eugene guy, yeah, that's a little attractive." He thought about it. He turned to me and he said, "Yeah." And that was it. That's all it took. That affirmation was what it took to set the road to the diaconate. I knew that I would have to wait 20 years because the minimum age to be ordained is 35 years old. And later, after a career in Catholic education and years of marriage, I applied. I remember at one point looking at the paperwork and thinking, there are a lot of requirements here. Is what I thought 20 years ago still true? I'd have to talk to my pastor, who didn't really know me as much. My wife knew the pastor more than me. All the applicants had to be tested by a psychologist. And quite frankly, younger candidates with kids were unlikely candidates. So I remember taking the paperwork and just plopping down, face down on the bed, thinking, And then, just like the song, "Here I Am, Lord, I have heard you calling in the night," there was this peaceful voice that just simply said in my heart, "Follow me, Dennis. Follow me, Dennis." It wasn't just follow me. It was follow me, Dennis. He used my name. And so I applied. And I was admitted. And there were a few times during the course of the program where I thought I was going to have to drop out because my wife and I found out that we were pregnant. And I thought, oh gosh, I need to tell the diocese this. So I go up to my teacher, his name was Deacon Mark. I said, "We're expecting, Deacon Mark." And he looked at me and he said, "Wow, what a gift! The gift of life." And I continued. And this actually happened 3 times during the 5-6 years. And finally, the diocese knew that I was educated by Jesuit priests, so they said, in my particular case, they said, "We'd like for you to go do spiritual direction with the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola." So I met with the Jesuit, and he said to me, "Okay, Dennis, you're going to have to meet with me every week, and I'd like for you to spend an hour of prayer wherever you'd like, the Blessed Sacrament, at home." And I said, "Okay, I can do that. I've been meaning to pray an hour every week." And then he said, "I'd like for you to do this every day for 6 to 9 months." I said, okay. And during formation, during this time in Lectio Divina with the Gospels, I encountered Jesus in the very scriptures that I would later proclaim to you all at Mass. And when I when I prostrated at the cathedral before the bishop ordained me, I asked for the virtues of the Blessed Mother. I fell in love with God's people, to smell like the sheep. Again, the second point is, just as Jesus recruited Simon Peter, so also he recruits you and me. You heard about me. And what about you? Especially those of you who are in the RCIA program, catechumens and candidates. What is your story? It's like a garden, and the gardener looking at all the pretty little flowers, like, wow, that one's beautiful. That one needs a little bit more work. That one, but the gardener, like, God is pleased with all of the garden, with our own specific vocation. So finally, having heard the vocation story from Simon Peter, and having heard a little bit of my own, and reflecting on your own, here are a few points of reflection. The first point is this. It's Jesus who initiates the call. There's a popular saying, God does not call the qualified. God qualifies the called. God doesn't always pick the best and the brightest and the most likely persons in ministry. In fact, if it was me, I'd probably pick somebody else better than Simon Peter, But when God does call you, it is God who makes you qualified. The other point of reflection is this. When Jesus does call you, sometimes you might doubt things will work out, just like Simon Peter did. When Jesus told him to go out and fish, he said, "Master, I've been fishing all night. I'm a fisherman, you're a carpenter. But if you say so, I will go ahead and lower my nets." We're stuck on what we know, but when we eventually do what Jesus says, Jesus will work miracles in our lives, just like he did when he did the miracle of the boatload of fish. And the third point of reflection is this. Like Simon Peter, we might say, "Oh, I'm called to that to help the church, to do great things for God with my family, or I'm single, or I might be going through a hardship." And Simon says, "Depart from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." You and I might think, "I'm a sinner. I make mistakes. I'm imperfect. I have a temper. People sometimes don't like me. People think that I don't talk very well. I'm not like that. I compare myself." But it is precisely in your weakness that he wants you to still follow him. And in fact, he loves you even more and delights in that even more because he's calling you. And it shows his power. It's through our weakness that God's power comes out. But even when Simon Peter acknowledges his sins and weaknesses, Jesus still chooses him all the more. There's a popular prayer at liturgy that says, "You choose the weak and make them strong in bearing witness to you." They left everything and followed him. So for you and me that live in the world, we have houses and we rent apartments. How can you apply this line about leaving all to follow him in your own life? Well, there must be some spiritual meaning to leaving all to follow Jesus. If we're not priests and nuns, leaving everything means leaving our old spiritual baggage, our old ways of thinking that we can't follow God because I'm not religious enough, or I'm not this, or I'm not that, or I'm too old, or I'm too young, or my health is poor, I have arthritis, or my brain doesn't work. Whatever excuse it might be, I can't follow. No, he still wants you to follow him, whatever the circumstances. So, dear brothers and sisters, what is your recruitment story in 5 to 10 minutes? How has God called you? How have you responded? And perhaps this Lenten season, Lent starts this Wednesday. It's Ash Wednesday on February 10. Perhaps we may say to ourselves, "I'm going to discern this for 40 days during Lent. So how can I follow him even more than I have my whole life?" In the movie The Passion of the Christ, there's a scene when Jesus is carrying the cross and Mary's trying to make her way to Jesus. And eventually she says, when she gets to Jesus, "I'm here. I'm here." May our response be like Mary's. As we heard in the first reading, did you catch that? It is written in the book of the prophet Isaiah. "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?'" Let our response, like Mary, be, "I'm here. I am here. Here I am. Here I am, Lord. Here I am. Here I am. Send me." Amen. Will the RCIA participants please come forward?